Hi, I'm Glenda Cedarleaf, and I invite you now to join me as we settle into these cozy winter tales. Before we begin our stories, please get comfortable in the ways that you know best. And when you're ready, close your eyes, taking a slow and deep breath. And imagine the night sky above you, deep blue and sparkling. Feel the cool air on your cheeks and the warmth of your sheets and blankets. Let your shoulders relax. Let your breath slow down. And continuing to let your whole body soften and relax as we now begin these stories. "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled down for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters, and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new-fallen snow gave a luster of midday to objects below. When what to my wondering eyes did appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment he must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky, so up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then, in a twinkling, I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. the stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke, it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, and then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." A Christmas Star, adapted from a story by Katherine, Pyle. "Come now, my dear stars," said Mother Moon, her voice soft as silver mist, "and I will tell you the Christmas story." Every morning for a week before Christmas, Mother Moon gathered her whole sky of stars close to her and told them the same story again and again, a story they never tired of hearing. It was the story of the Christmas star, the Star of Bethlehem. When Mother Moon finished, the stars would whisper, "And the star is still shining still, isn't it, Mother Moon? Even if we cannot see it?" "It is, my dears. Only now it shines within people's hearts instead of for their eyes." And then the stars would bid her good night, put on their tiny blue nightcaps, and drift off into the sky chamber, because stars go to bed just as the people on earth. But on this particular morning, one golden star stayed beside Mother Moon. "What do you need, my dear?" she asked. "Why do you linger?" Mother Moon, whispered the golden star, "I wish I could shine for someone's heart, just like the Star of Bethlehem. I feel I must find the heart that I belong to." Mother Moon looked at the star with deep, knowing eyes. "Then the time has come," she said gently, "for you to take your journey through the wonder entry." "What is that?" asked the little star. "It is a portal that will take you to a whole new world. Through it, you will find the heart where you belong." The little star began to tremble. He longed to journey forward. Oh, how he longed. Yet fear fluttered in him as well, like a tiny bird unsure of its wings. So he clung to Mother Moon for a while, nestling against her soft silver glow, until at last, with a brave and breathy whisper, he announced, "I am ready to go." And Mother Moon smiled and guided him to a beautiful shimmering door. She held his small hand and softly breathed, "Go now, my child." The star hesitated for only a moment, gathering courage in his flickering light. Then he reached for the crystal doorknob. It sparkled like frost kissed by the dawn. He turned it and stepped into the mysterious wonder entry. At once a rush of ethereal music drifted through the air, notes as light as firefly wings and as sweet as snowflakes falling on a quiet night. All the stars' fears dissolved in that magical melody. No longer alone, he floated down a long, shimmering hallway until, far in the distance, he saw a single speck of light glowing like a tiny promise. And before he fully understood what had happened, the little star found himself hanging in a toy shop among rows of blue, red, and silver stars. Yet he alone glowed gold. Evergreen perfumed the air, and Christmas shoppers wove through the room like jolly, bustling comets. But the star noticed only one face, a small boy standing beside his attentive mother. The moment the star saw the boy, he felt the truth flare within him like sunrise. This is the child. His heart is the one I belong to. The star trembled on its silver string, hoping the boy would see. Suddenly he tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Oh, Mother, look at that star. I wish I had it." The woman's eyes softened. "Very well, darling, we'll take it too." Wrapped tenderly in paper, the star glowed from within, joyful, certain, home at last. On Christmas Eve, as the family decorated their tree, the golden star was lifted and placed at the very top. When the candles were lit that night, the whole tree glittered. And yet above every ornament, every shining ribbon and bauble, the golden star shone brightest. The little boy stepped away from the others, gazing up with his hands clasped behind him. He cared little for toys. It was the star that held his heart. When Christmas ended and the decorations were taken down, the boy begged to keep the star in his room. He loved its soft, warm glow at bedtime. Its gentle light wrapped him in safety and peace, and from then on he never feared the dark. The star became his loyal companion. Days passed like drifting feathers. Months slipped by like quiet sighs. Years unfurled into decades. The little star traveled through the boy's life as faithfully as a heartbeat. And as time would have it, the boy eventually became a very old man. His body, once lively and strong, could no longer carry him across this earthly world. He knew it was time to release its weight and let his spirit fly free. He turned to his bedside and picked up the golden star that he had chosen so many years ago. He held it close. A shining, peaceful smile blossomed across his face. He really deeply understood now that this star had always been glowing inside his heart. Together, man and star, soul and light, they drifted into a new and wondrous sky where countless star angels shimmered in welcome. They rose through a celestial sky illuminated by the eternal glow of the Christmas star and the tender radiance of Mother Moon, shining gently within them both. And that, dear one, is the end of our story, The Christmas Star. Little Gretchen and the Wooden Shoe, adapted from a story by Elizabeth Harrison. Far across the ocean in Germany, on the edge of a deep fir forest, stood a small log hut. It had only one room, lit by a single square window and warmed by a chimney that often sent up only the thinnest thread of smoke. Inside lived an old woman known as Granny Goodyear, and with her lived a bright little girl named Gretchen, whose cheerful spirit made travelers think of sunlight. Each morning in winter, after a simple breakfast of oatmeal, Gretchen wrapped Granny in an old woolen shawl, kissed her goodbye, and sent her into the forest to gather fallen branches to sell for kindling in the village. These few pennies, plus the vegetables they grew in summer, were enough to keep them warm and fed. Though their life was plain, they were very happy, for they loved each other deeply. 1 week before Christmas, Gretchen went with Granny to the village and saw her first Christmas toys: dolls, wooden ships, woolly lambs. Her eyes shone, though she never expected to own any of these toys. That night she sat at Granny's feet. "Granny," she asked softly, "what do you think I'll get for Christmas?" Granny sighed. "Ah, child, we're too poor this year." But Gretchen's hope-bright eyes sparkled. "Perhaps the Christmas angels won't forget us." Granny stroked her hair sadly. "Dear child, I fear no one will think of us." But Gretchen only smiled and hugged Granny tightly. "Oh, you do not talk to the stars enough." The days passed. Gretchen decorated their humble home with pine branches to surprise Granny, making their doorway and bedposts look festive and bright. Granny's tired eyes softened at the sight. On Christmas Eve, after warm stories and gentle prayers, Granny placed her heavy wooden shoes by the hearth. Gretchen suddenly lifted one of them. "Granny, may I put one of your shoes on the windowsill for the Christmas angels to see?" "Oh, foolish child," said Granny, "in the morning there will be nothing in it." But Gretchen only kissed her cheek and slipped outside. She looked up at the night sky and saw those stars. The snow kissed her face, and she looked up for her favorite star. Though clouds hid the sky at times, a sudden rush of wind opened a gap, and there the star twinkled down at her. "Dear little star," she whispered, "tell the Christmas angels that Gretchen hopes for just one gift, if they have one to spare. I've put the shoe right here." She placed the shoe on the sill and returned to bed, her heart light. At dawn, sweet music from the village carolers woke her. She hurried outside, brushing snow from the wooden shoe, and felt something warm inside. "Granny," she cried, running in, "they did remember us. The stars remembered us." In the toe of the shoe nestled a tiny chickadee with a broken wing, sheltering from the night storm. Granny gently bound the wing and showed Gretchen how to make a warm nest. All Christmas Day, the little bird chirped softly, ate crumbs from Gretchen's fingers, and filled their home with unexpected joy. That evening, after songs and stories, Gretchen hugged Granny and whispered, "What a beautiful Christmas we have had." And she thanked the stars and the angels and gave Granny one more hug. And that's the end of this story. The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus by L. Frank Baum. Once upon a time, so very long ago, there lived within the great forest of Burgess a wood nymph named Necile. Her hair was the color that lines a chestnut burr. Her eyes were blue in the sunlight and purple in the shade. Her cheeks bloomed with the faint pink that edges the clouds at sunset. She was closely related to the mighty Queen Zerline, and her home was beneath the shade of a wide-spreading oak. Necile's duties were few and simple. She kept weeds from growing beneath her trees and sapping the earth food required by her charges. In dry seasons, she carried water from the brooks and pools and moistened the roots of her thirsty dependents. One day, the great Auk visited the forest of Burgess, and he told the nymphs, "We live so happily, my fair ones, in our forest glades, that we know nothing of the sorrow and misery that fall to the lot of those poor mortals who inhabit the open spaces of the earth. They are not of our race, it is true. Sometimes these mortals abandon their babes at the edge of the forest. Maybe it's because they don't have enough food to support these children. Sometimes I feel so sorry for the children of these mortals that I step in to rescue them." When Necile heard this, she decided she'd go into the forest to see if she could find one of these human children. She wandered for several hours until eventually she found a baby lying in the grass, sweetly sleeping. Softly, she stole to the side of the babe, who was newborn, chubby and pink, and entirely helpless. While the nymph gazed, the infant opened its eyes and smiled upon her, stretching out two dimpled arms. And although she knew that the great Auk did not give her permission to do this, Necile picked up the child and brought the child home. When the great Auk found out, he said, "A nymph has defiled me in my laws, yet in my heart can I find no word of chiding." He told Necile, "You shall keep the babe, and I will give it my protection. But I warn everyone that this is the first time I have relaxed the law, and it shall be the last time. Nevermore to the end of the world shall a mortal be adopted by an immortal. Good night, my nymphs." And then Ak was gone from their midst, and Necile hurried away to rejoice over her newfound treasure. Soon, Necile's home was the most popular place in the forest. The nymphs clustered around her to see the child that lay asleep in her lap, with expressions of curiosity and delight. "What shall we call him, Necile?" "He must have a name." "Let him be called Claus," answered Necile, "for that means little one." Well, the queen said, "Let's call him Niklaus, for that will mean Necile's little one." The nymphs clapped their hands in delight, and Niklaus became the infant's name, although Necile loved best to call him Claus. Necile gathered the softest moss in all the forest for Claus to lie upon. She made his bed in her own home, and the little one flourished and grew big and sturdy day by day, while Necile taught him to speak, to walk, and to play. His thoughts and words were sweet and gentle, for the nymphs knew no evil, and their hearts were pure and loving. He became the pet of the forest, for Ak's decree had forbidden beast or reptile to hurt him. He walked fearlessly wherever his goodwill guided him. Claus looked upon the immortals who thronged around him with fearless eyes and smiling lips. He rode laughingly upon the shoulders of the merry Ryls. He mischievously pulled the gray beards of the low-browed Knooks. The Ryls loved the sound of his laughter, and the Knooks loved his courage. The fairies loved his innocence. The boy made friends with them all and learned to know their laws intimately. No forest flower was trampled beneath his feet, lest the friendly Ryls should be grieved. He never interfered with the beasts of the forest, lest his friends the Knooks should become angry. The fairies he loved dearly, but knowing nothing of mankind, he could not understand that he was the only one of his race living with them. To him, the forest was the world. He had no idea that millions of toiling, striving human creatures existed. He was happy and content. Years passed swiftly in Burzee. The nymphs have no need to regard time in any way. Even centuries make no change in the dainty creatures. Ever and ever they remain the same, immortal and unchanging. Claus, however, being mortal, grew to manhood day by day. Necile was disturbed presently to find him too big to lie in her lap, and he had a desire for other food than milk. His stout legs carried him far into the forest of Burzee, where he gathered supplies of nuts and berries. The nymph who had come to love him dearly was puzzled to comprehend the changed nature of her charge, and unconsciously she changed her life to conform to his whims. She followed him readily through the forest paths. All the mysteries of the gigantic wood and the habits and the nature of the living things she would explain to him as they walked. And time passed on until one day the master woodsman came back to the forest of Burzee he found sitting a broad-shouldered, stalwart youth who stood fully as high as the shoulder of the master himself. So he decided it was now time to take Klaus on a journey to see the world. With this news, Necile wept. She had never cried in all of her life, but now she clung to the boy's neck as if she could not bear to let him go. Nonetheless, Och's mind was not changed, and he went forward in his plans to travel the world with Klaus. One morning, he came to get Klaus, brought him into a clearing in the forest, and said, "Place your hand upon my girdle and hold fast, while we journey through the air. For now shall we encircle the world and look upon many of the haunts of those men from whom you are descended." Klaus did what he was told, and soon they found themselves passing swiftly through the air at a great height. They could see buildings of many shapes and colors and the towns below them as they flew by. The master then said, "So long as you hold fast to my girdle, you will remain unseen by all mankind, though you will see them clearly. To release your grasp will be to separate yourself forever from me and your home in Burgess." One of the first laws of the forest is obedience, and Klaus had no thought of disobeying the master's wish. He clung fast to the girdle and remained invisible. They visited cities, and Klaus's sense of wonder grew, for now he was surrounded with creatures of his own kind for the first time in his life. Klaus looked earnestly upon his fellows. There were sad faces and happy faces, pleasant, kindly, and curious faces. But he especially noted the children, first curiously, then eagerly, and then lovingly. Ragged little ones rolled in the dust of the streets, playing with scraps and pebbles. Yet the children of the rich were not happier than those playing with the dust and pebbles, it seemed to Claus. "Childhood is the time of men's greatest content," said Och, following the youth's thoughts. "'Tis during those years of innocent pleasure that the little ones are most free from care." "Tell me," said Klaus, "why do not all these babies fare alike?" "Because they're born in both cottage and palace," returned the master. "The difference in the wealth of the parents determines the lot of the child. Some are carefully tended and clothed in silks and dainty linen. Others are neglected and covered with rags." "Yet all seem equally fair and sweet," said Klaus thoughtfully. "While they are babes, yes," agreed Och. "Their joy is in being alive, and they do not stop to think." Klaus was silent a moment, and then he asked, "Why was I reared in the forest among those who are not of my race?" Then Och, in a gentle voice, told him the story of his babyhood, how he had been abandoned at the forest's edge and left as prey for the wild beasts, and how the loving nymph Necile had rescued him and brought him to manhood under the protection of the immortals. "Yet I am not of them," said Klaus musingly. "You are not of them," returned the woodsman. "The nymph who cared for you as a mother seems now like a sister to you." By and by, when you grow old and gray, she will seem like a daughter. Yet another brief span, and you will be but a memory, while she remains Nassil. Then why, if man must perish, is he born? Demanded the boy. Everything perishes except the world itself and its keepers, answered Ak. But while life lasts, everything on earth has its use. The wise seek ways to be helpful to the world, for the helpful ones are sure to live again. Much of this Claus failed to understand fully, but a longing seized him to become helpful to his fellows. And he remained grave and thoughtful while they resumed their journey. They visited many dwellings of men in many parts of the world, watching farmers toil in the fields, warriors dash into conflict, merchants exchanging their goods for bits of white and yellow metal. And everywhere, the eyes of Claus sought out the children in love and pity. For the thought of his own helpless babyhood was strong within him, and he yearned to give help to the innocent little ones. And then, at last, they returned to the grand old forest of Burgess, where the master set Claus down within the circle of nymphs, among whom the pretty Nassil anxiously awaited him. But the brow of Claus had become lined with deep thought, and only a few days passed before he announced to the nymphs, "I must leave you now, to take my part in the endless struggle to which humanity is doomed, and to live my life in my own way." "What will you do?" asked the queen gravely. "I must devote myself to the care of the children of mankind and try to make them happy," he answered. "Since your own tender care of a babe brought to me happiness and strength, thus will the memory of the loving nymph Nassil be planted within the hearts of thousands of my race for many years to come, and her kindly act be recounted in song and in story, while the whole world shall last." "Have I spoken well, O Master?" "You have spoken well," returned Ak. And rising to his feet, he continued, "Yet one thing must not be forgotten. Having been adopted as the child of the forest and the playfellow of the nymphs, you have gained a distinction which forever separates you from your kind. Therefore, when you go forth into the world of men, you shall retain the protection of the forest, and the powers you now enjoy will remain with you to assist you in your labors. In any need you may call upon the nymphs, the ryls, the knooks, and the fairies, and they will serve you gladly. I, the master woodsman of the world, have said it, and my word is the law." Claus looked upon Ak with grateful eyes. "This will make me mighty among men," he replied, "protected by those kind friends, that I may be able to make thousands of little children happy. I will try very hard to do my duty, and I know the forest people will give me their support." "We will," said Fairy Queen earnestly. "We will," cried the merry ryls, laughing. "We will," shouted the crooked knooks, scowling. "We will," exclaimed the sweet nymphs proudly. But Nassil said nothing. She only folded Claus in her arms and kissed him tenderly. "The world is big," continued the boy, turning again to his loyal friends, "but men are everywhere. I shall begin my work near my friends, so that if I meet with misfortune, I can come to the forest for counsel or help." And with that, he gave them all a loving look and turned away. The sweet, wild life of the forest was over. It was time for him to go forth bravely. Coming through Burgess to its eastern edge, Claus reached the laughing valley of Ho-Ha-Ho. On each side were rolling green hills, and a brook wandered midway between them to wind afar off beyond the valley. At his back was the grim forest. At the far end of the valley, a broad plain. The eyes of the young man, which had until now reflected his grave thoughts, became brighter as he stood silent, looking out upon the laughing valley. Then, on a sudden, his eyes twinkled, as stars do on a still night, and grew merry and wide. For at his feet, the cowslips and daisies smiled on him in friendly regard. The breeze whistled gaily as it passed by and fluttered the locks on his forehead. The brook laughed joyously as it leaped over the pebbles and swept around the green curves of its banks. The bees sang sweet songs as they flew from dandelion to daffodil. The beetles chirruped happily in the long grass, and the sunbeams glinted pleasantly over all the scene. "Here," cried Claus, stretching out his arms as if to embrace the valley, "will I make my home." The valley was empty except for grass and the brook and the wildflowers and the bees and the butterflies. So Claus decided to make his home there and live after the fashion of men. So he decided he needed to create a house. He got to work, finding tree trunks, making the logs, and eventually building his own home. And here in Laughing Valley he lived, and the spirit of happiness crept into his heart, and nevermore would the face of Claus be clouded with anxieties. Nevermore would the trials of life weigh him down as with a burden. The Laughing Valley had claimed him for its own. The birds came sweeping into the valley at daybreak, and their song, so seldom heard in the deep wood, aroused Claus. He rubbed the web of sleep from his eyelids and looked around. He eventually met the Knooks and the fairies and the Ryls. They taught him how to plow the earth and plant corn in the valley. They brought him food and warm blankets and clothing. And here in the Laughing Valley, Claus loved his life, delighting in the favor and friendship of the immortals that had ministered to his every want. One day, Claus knew it was time to venture across the valley and to the plain beyond, and eventually to reach the villages where the children lived. As he traveled to the villages, the youngsters came to know him. They knew his merry, laughing face and his kind glance of bright eyes. The parents, while they regarded the young man with some scorn for loving children more than their elders, were content that the girls and boys had found a playfellow who seemed willing to amuse them. So the children romped and played games with Claus, and the boys rode upon his shoulders, and the girls nestled in his strong arms. and the babies clung fondly to his knees. Wherever the young man chanced to be, the sound of childish laughter followed him. And to understand this better, you must know that children were much neglected in those days and received little attention from their parents, so that it became to them a marvel that so goodly a man as Claus devoted his time to making them happy. And those who knew him were, you may be sure, very happy indeed. One winter evening he picked up a stick of wood and began to cut it with his sharp knife. He had no thought at first except to just occupy his time. He whistled and sang to the cat and continued to carve away portions of the stick. And eventually, the wood began to have a shape, and the shape was like the head of a cat, with 2 ears sticking upward. Once he realized he had made a cat, he also realized that he had made his first toy. Back in Laughing Valley, snow had covered it like a white spread, and pillows of downy flakes drifted before the dwelling where Claus sat, feeding the blaze of the fire. The brook gurgled on beneath a heavy sheet of ice, and all living plants and insects nestled close to Mother Earth to keep warm. The face of the moon was hid by dark clouds, and the wind, delighting in the wintry sport, pushed and whirled the snowflakes in so many directions that they could get no chance to fall to the ground. Claus heard the wind whistling and shrieking in its play and thanked the good nooks again for his comfortable shelter. Then, all of a sudden, Claus heard a noise that sounded different from the voice of the wind. He stood up and listened, but the wind, growing boisterous, shook the door and rattled the windows to distract his attention. He waited until the wind was tired, and then, still listening, he heard once more. Quickly he drew on his coat, pulled his cap over his eyes, and opened the door. The wind dashed in and scattered the embers over the hearth. He went outside and peering anxiously into the darkness. The wind laughed and scolded and tried to push him over, but he stood firm. The helpless flakes stumbled against his eyes and dimmed his sight, but he rubbed them away and looked again. Snow was everywhere, white and glittering. It covered the earth and filled the air. The cry was not repeated. Claus turned to go back into the house, but the wind caught him unawares and he stumbled and fell across a snowdrift. His hand plunged into the drift and touched something that was not snow. This he seized, and pulling it gently toward him, found it to be a child. The next moment he had lifted it into his arms and carried it into the house. The wind followed him through the door, but Claus shut it out quickly. He laid the rescued child on the hearth and brushed away the snow, and he discovered it to be a weekum, a little boy who lived in a house beyond the valley. Claus wrapped a warm blanket around the little one and rubbed the frost from its limbs. Before long, the child opened his eyes and, seeing where he was, smiled happily. Then Claus warmed milk and fed it to the boy slowly, while the cat looked on with sober curiosity. Finally, the little one curled up in his friend's arms and sighed and fell asleep. And Claus filled with gladness that he had found the wanderer, held him closely while he slumbered. The wind, finding no more mischief to do, climbed the hill and swept on towards the north. This gave the weary snowflakes time to settle down to earth, and the valley became still again. The boy, having slept well in the arms of his friend, opened his eyes and sat up. Then, as a child will, he looked around the room and saw all it contained. "How did you get lost in the storm, Weekum?" asked Klaus. "I started to walk to my auntie's house and lost my way," answered Weekum. "Were you frightened?" "It was cold," said Weekum, "and the snow got in my eyes so I could not see. Then I kept on till I fell in the snow without knowing where I was. And the wind blew the flakes over my head and covered me up." Klaus gently stroked his head, and the boy looked up at him and smiled. "I'm all right now," said Weekum. "Yes, you are safe, and in the morning I will carry you back to your mother." When morning came, the sun claimed the Laughing Valley and flooded it with his rays. So Klaus prepared to take the lost child back to his mother. The good woman wept tears of joy over the rescue of her darling and thanked Klaus many times for his kind act. So when he returned home, he carried a warm and happy heart back to the Laughing Valley. That night, he said to his cat, "I believe the children will love the wooden cats almost as well as the real ones, and they can't hurt them by pulling their tails and ears. I'll make another." And with that decision, Klaus had now begun his great work. He continued to make trips back to the village to check on the children. One day he found a poor hut near the walls of the beautiful palace of the Lord of Lurd. In the hut lay a little girl upon a wretched cot. She was moaning with pain. Klaus approached the child and kissed her and comforted her. And then he drew the toy cat from beneath his coat, where he had hidden it, and he placed it in her arms. Her eyes grew bright with pleasure. She hugged the kitty to her breast as if it were a precious gem. Her fever was quieted. The pain grew less and less, and she eventually fell into a sweet and refreshing sleep. Klaus laughed and whistled and sang all the way home. He felt very well paid for his labor, to know that he had brought happiness and healing to that little girl. Never had he been so happy as on that day. And in time, the winter was over and all the Laughing Valley was filled with joyous excitement. The brook was so happy at being free once again that it gurgled more boisterously than ever and dashed so recklessly against the rocks, and it sent showers of spray high in the air. The grass thrust its sharp little blades upward through the mat of dead stalks, where it had hidden from the snow. The flowers were yet too timid to show themselves, although the riles were busy feeding their roots. The sun was in remarkably good humor and sent its rays dancing merrily throughout the valley. Klaus continued to carve cats, and then he decided to create other animals, a wooden rabbit and a lamb. The new toys pleased the children, and the fame of Klaus's playthings quickly spread to every cottage on plain and in village. He always carried his gifts to the sick children, for those who were strong enough walked to the house in the valley to ask for them. So a little path was soon worn from the plain to the door of the toy maker's cottage. The nooks selected for him clear pieces of soft wood, that his knife might not be blunted in cutting them. The riles kept him supplied with paints of all colors and brushes fashioned from the tips of timothy grasses. The fairies discovered that the workmen needed saws and chisels and hammers and nails and knives, and they brought Claus a good array of such tools. Klaus soon turned his living room into a most wonderful workshop. He built a bench before the window and arranged his tools and paints so that he could reach everything as he sat on his stool. And as he finished toy after toy to delight the hearts of little children, he found himself growing so happy that he could not refrain from singing and laughing and whistling all the day long. He went down to the brook to get clay so he could mold the clay into toys. There was no difficult task for him. Before he knew it, a baby doll was lying on the board and placed in the sun to dry. Then Klaus called the fairies and asked them to bring him colored silks with which to make a real dress for the clay image. The fairies set off at once on their errand, and before nightfall, they returned with a generous supply of silks and laces and golden threads. So now our Klaus had become a dressmaker as well as a toy maker. He cut the lavender silk and nearly sewed it into a beautiful gown that just fit the new dolly. He put a lace collar around its neck and pink silk shoes on its feet. The natural color of baked clay is a light gray, so Klaus painted the face to resemble the color of flesh, and he gave the dolly Bessie's brown eyes and golden hair and rosy cheeks. It was really a beautiful thing to look upon, and sure to bring joy to some childish heart. Remembering the time when he had journeyed with Ak through the world, Klaus knew children were everywhere, and he longed to make them as happy as possible with the gifts that he had created. So he loaded a great sack with all kinds of toys, slung it upon his back that he might carry it more easily, and started off on a longer trip than he had yet undertaken. Wherever he showed his merry face, in hamlet or in farmhouse, he received a cordial welcome, for his fame had spread into far lands. At each village the children swarmed about him, following his footsteps wherever he went. And the women thanked him gratefully for the joy he brought their little ones. And the men looked upon him curiously, that he should devote his time to such an occupation as toy making. But everyone smiled on him and gave him kindly words, and Klaus felt amply repaid for his long journey. When the sack was empty, he went back to the Laughing Valley and once more filled it to the brim. This time he followed another road into a different part of the country and carried happiness to many children who never before had owned a toy or guessed that such a delightful plaything even existed. After a third journey, so far away that Klaus was many days walking the distance, the store of toys became exhausted, and without delay he set about making a fresh supply. From seeing so many children and studying their tastes, he had acquired several new ideas about toys. The dollies were, he had found, the most delightful of all playthings for babies and little girls. So Claus resolved to make many dolls of all sizes and to dress them in bright-colored clothing. The older boys, and even some of the girls, loved the images of animals. So he made cats, elephants, and horses. And many of the little fellows had musical natures and longed for drums and cymbals and whistles and horns. So he made a number of toy drums with tiny sticks to beat them with. And he made whistles from the willow trees and horns from the bog reeds and cymbals from bits of beaten metal. All this kept him busily at work, and before he realized it, the winter season came with deeper snows than usual. And he knew he could not leave the valley with his heavy pack. So Claus remained at his workbench, but he whistled and sang as merrily as ever, for he would allow no disappointment to sour his temper or make him unhappy. One bright morning he looked from his window and saw 2 of the deer he had known in the forest walking towards his house. Claus was surprised, not that the friendly deer should visit him, but that they walked on the surface of the snow, as easily as if it were solid ground. Notwithstanding the fact that throughout the valley the snow lay many feet deep. He had walked out of his house a day or 2 before and had sunk to his armpits in a drift. So, when the deer came near, he opened the door and called to them, "Good morning, Flossie. Tell me, how are you able to walk on the snow so easily?" "It is frozen hard," answered Flossie. "The Frost King has breathed on it," said Glossie, coming up, "and the surface is now as solid as ice." "Well, perhaps," said Claus thoughtfully, "I might now carry my pack of toys to the children." "Is it a long journey?" asked Flossie. "Yes, it'll take me many days, for the pack is heavy," answered Claus. "Then the snow would melt before you could get back," said the deer. "You must wait until spring, Claus." Claus sighed. "Had I your fleet feet," said he, "I could make the journey in a day." "But you have not," returned Glossie, looking at his own slender legs with pride. "Perhaps I could ride upon your back," Claus ventured to remark after a pause. "Oh no, our backs are not strong enough to bear your weight," said Flossie decidedly. "But if you have a sleigh and could harness us to it, we might draw you easily, and your pack as well." "Well, I'll make a sleigh," exclaimed Claus. "Will you agree to draw me if I do?" "Well," replied Flossie, "we must first go and ask the Knooks, who are our guardians, for permission. But if they consent, and you can make a sleigh and harness, we will gladly assist you." "Then go at once," cried Claus eagerly. "I am sure the friendly Knooks will give their consent, and by the time you are back, I shall be ready to harness you to my sleigh." Flossie and Glossie, being the deer of much intelligence, had long wished to see the great world, so they gladly ran over the frozen snow to ask the Knooks if they might carry Claus on his journey. Meantime, the toy maker hurriedly began the construction of a sleigh, using material from his wood pile. He made 2 long runners that turned upward at the front ends, and across these nailed short boards to make a platform. It was soon completed, but was as rude in appearance as it was possible for a sleigh to be. The harness was more difficult to prepare, but Claus twisted cords together and knotted them so they would fit around the necks of the deer in the shape of a collar. From these ran other cords to fasten the deer to the front of the sleigh. Before the work was completed, Glossie and Flossie were back from the forest, having been granted permission by Will Nook to make the journey with Claus, provided they would return to Burzee by daybreak the next morning. "That's not a very long time," said Flossie, "but we are swift and strong, and if we get started by this evening, we can travel many miles during the night. Are you ready?" Claus seated himself upon the stool, placed the stack of toys at his feet, and then gathered up the reins. "All ready," he shouted, "and away we go." The deer leaned forward, lifted their slender limbs, and the next moment, away flew the sleigh over the frozen snow. The swiftness of the motion surprised Claus, for in a few strides they were across the valley and gliding over the broad plain beyond. The day had melted into evening by the time they started, for swiftly as Claus had worked, many hours had been consumed in making his preparations. But the moon shone brightly to light their way, and Claus soon decided it was just as pleasant to travel by night as by day. Away and away they sped, on and on over the hills and through the valleys and across the plains, flying across the sky with a sleigh filled with all the handmade gifts that Claus had created himself. And that is just how Claus and the sleigh and the reindeer took their first of many journeys to come, traveling across the winter sky, bringing happiness and hope to all the children. Claus and his reindeer landed in a village where they had never been before, and a new difficulty now presented itself, for the people had locked their doors when they went to bed, and Claus found he could not enter the houses to leave his toys. "I am afraid, my friends, we have made our journey for nothing," said he, "for I shall be obliged to carry my playthings back home again without giving them to the children of this village." "What's the matter?" asked Flossie. "The doors are locked," answered Claus, "and I cannot get in." Glossie looked around at the houses. The snow was quite deep in that village, and just before them was a roof only a few feet above the sleigh. A broad chimney, which seemed to Glossie's big enough to admit Claus, was at the peak of the roof. "Why don't you climb down that chimney?" asked Glossie. Claus looked at it. "That would be easy enough if I were on top of the roof," he answered. "Then hold fast, and we will take you there," said the deer, and they gave one bound to the roof and landed beside the big chimney. "Good," cried Claus, well pleased, and he slung the pack of toys over his shoulder and got into the chimney. There was plenty of soot on the bricks, but he did not mind that, and by placing his hands and knees against the sides, he crept downward until he had reached the fireplace. Leaping lightly over the smoldering coals, he found himself in a large sitting room where a dim light was burning. From this room, 2 doorways led into smaller chambers. In one, a woman lay asleep with a baby beside her in a crib. Klaus laughed, but he did not laugh aloud for fear of waking the baby. Then he slipped a big doll from his pack and laid it in the crib. And Klaus crept softly from the room and entered at the other doorway. Here were 2 boys fast asleep. Klaus gazed at them lovingly, and then placed upon the bed a drum, 2 horns, and a wooden elephant. He did not linger now that his work in this house was done, but climbed the chimney again and seated himself on his sleigh. "Can you find another chimney?" he asked the reindeer. "Easily enough," replied Glossie and Flossie. Down to the edge of the roof they raced, and then, without pausing, leaped through the air to the top of the next building, where a huge old-fashioned chimney stood. "Don't be so long this time," called Flossie, "or we shall never get back to the forest by daybreak." Klaus made a trip down this chimney also, and found 5 children sleeping in the house, all of whom were quickly supplied with toys. When he had climbed down the chimneys of all the houses in that village, and had left a toy for every sleeping child, Klaus found that his great sack was not yet half emptied. "Onward, friends," he called to the deer, "we must seek another village." So away they dashed, although it was long past midnight, and in a surprisingly short time they came to a large city, the largest Klaus had ever visited since he began to make toys. But he was not daunted by the throng of houses. He set to work at once, and his beautiful steeds carried him rapidly from one roof to another, only the highest being beyond the leaps of the agile deer. At last, the supply of toys was exhausted, and Klaus seated himself in the sleigh with the empty sack at his feet and turned the heads of Glossie and Flossie towards home. Presently Flossie asked, "What is that gray streak in the sky?" "It is the coming of the dawn of the day," answered Klaus, surprised to find that it was so late. "Good gracious," exclaimed Glossie, "then we shall not be home by daybreak. And the Knooks will punish us and never let us come again. We must race for the Laughing Valley and make our best speed," returned Flossie. "So hold fast, friend Klaus." Klaus held fast, and the next moment was flying so swiftly over the snow that he could not see the trees as they whirled past. Uphill and down dale, swift as an arrow shot from a bow, they dashed. And Klaus shut his eyes to keep the wind out of them and let the deer to find their own way. Finally, the sled came to a sudden stop, and Klaus, who was taken unawares, tumbled from his seat into a snowdrift. The sleigh had come to a stop in the Laughing Valley, only a few feet from the front door. In the east, the day was breaking, and turning to the edge of Burzee, he saw Glossie and Flossie just disappearing into the forest. Klaus thought that none of the children would ever know where the toys came from when they found them by their bedsides upon wakening the following morning. But kindly deeds are sure to bring fame, and fame has many wings to carry its tidings into far lands. So for miles and miles in every direction, people were talking of Klaus and his wonderful gifts to children. The sweet generousness of his work caused a few selfish folk to sneer, But even these were forced to admit their respect for a man so gentle-natured that he loved to devote his life to pleasing the helpless little ones of his race. Therefore, the inhabitants of every city and village had been eagerly watching the coming of Claus, and remarkable stories of his beautiful playthings were told. When on the morning following the first trip of Claus with his deer, the little ones came running to their parents with the pretty toys they had found, and asked from whence they came. And there was just one reply to this question: "The good Claus must have come here, my darlings, for his are the only toys in all the world." "But how did he get in?" asked the children. At this, the fathers shook their heads, being themselves unable to understand how Claus had gained admittance to their homes. But the mothers, watching the glad faces of their dear ones, whispered that the good Claus was no mortal man, but assuredly a saint, and they piously blessed his name for the happiness he had bestowed upon their children. "A saint," said one with bowed head, "has no need to unlock doors if it pleases him to enter our homes." And afterward, when a child was naughty or disobedient, its mother would say, "You must pray to the good Santa Claus for forgiveness. He does not like naughty children, and unless you respect, he will bring you no more pretty toys." But Santa Claus himself would not have approved this speech. He brought toys to the children because they were little and because he loved them. He knew that the best of children were sometimes naughty. It is the way with children the world over, and he would not have changed their natures had he possessed the power to do so. And that is how Claus became Santa Claus. One night, Claus decided to travel in another direction. He told his reindeer, "We shall find children I have never yet visited, and we must travel fast and work quickly, for my sack is full of toys and running over the brim." So just as the moon arose, they dashed out of the Laughing Valley and across the plain and over the hills to the south. The air was sharp and frosty, and the starlight touched the snowflakes and made them glitter like countless diamonds. The reindeer leaped onward with strong, steady bounds, and Klaus's heart was so light and merry that he laughed and sang while the wind whistled past his ears. The mother owls heard him as he passed near a wood and stuck their heads out of the hollow places in the tree trunks. But when they saw who it was, they whispered to the owlets nestling near them that it was only Santa Claus carrying toys to the children. It's strange how much those mother owls know. Claus stopped at some of the scattered farmhouses and climbed down the chimneys to leave presents for the babies. Then away he went, signing his joyous carol. "Now away we go o'er the gleaming snow, while the deer run swift and free. For to girls and boys we carry the toys that will fill their hearts with glee." The deer liked the sound of his deep bass voice and kept time to the song with their hoofbeats on the hard snow. But soon they stopped at another chimney, and Santa Claus, with sparkling eyes and face brushed red by the wind, climbed down its smoky sides and left a present for every child the house contained. It was a merry, happy night. Swiftly the deer ran, and busily their driver worked to scatter his gifts among the sleeping children. And when he returned home, Claus was so wearied with his night's work that he threw himself upon his bed and fell into a deep slumber. And while he slept, the Christmas sun appeared in the sky and shone upon hundreds of happy homes, where the sound of childish laughter proclaimed that Santa Claus had made them a visit. It was his first Christmas Eve, and for hundreds of years since then, he has nobly fulfilled his mission to bring happiness to the hearts of little children. When you remember that no child until Santa Claus began his travels had ever known the pleasure of possessing a toy, you will understand how joy crept into the homes of those who had been favored with a visit from the good man, and how they talked of him day by day in loving tones and were honestly grateful for his kindly deeds. It is true that great warriors and mighty kings and clever scholars of that day were often spoken of by the people, but no one of them was so greatly beloved as Santa Claus, because none other was so unselfish as to devote himself to making others happy. For a generous deed lives longer than a great battle, or a king's decree of a scholar's essay, because it spreads and leaves its mark on all nature and endures through many generations. As Claus continued his Christmas deliveries, he realized he needed a new sleigh. He spent 1 year building it, and when it was finally done, he realized he also needed to add more deer to his team. And before he knew it, there was a team of 10 reindeer. When another Christmas Eve drew near, there was a monster load of beautiful gifts for the children. A big sleigh with plenty of reindeer to carry them. Claus filled 3 sacks to the brim and tucked every corner of the sleigh box full of toys. Then at twilight, the 10 reindeer appeared, and Flossie introduced them all to Claus. They were Racer and Pacer, Reckless and Speckless, Fearless and Peerless, and Ready and Steady, who, with Glossie and Flossie, made up the 10 who have traversed the world these hundreds of years with their generous master. They were all exceedingly beautiful, with slender limbs, spreading antlers, velvety dark eyes, and smooth coats of fawn color spotted with white. Claus loved them at once and has loved them ever since, for they are loyal friends and have rendered him priceless service. The new harness fitted them nicely, and soon they were all fastened to the sleigh by twos, with Glossie and Flossie in the lead. They wore the strings of sleigh bells, and were so delighted with the music they made, they kept prancing up and down to make the bells ring. Claus now seated himself in the sleigh, drew a warm robe over his knees and his fur cap over his ears, and cracked his long whip as a signal to start. Instantly, the 10 leaped forward and were away like the wind, while jolly Claus laughed gleefully to see them run. He shouted a song in his big, hearty voice. Now away we go o'er the frozen snow, as merry as we can be. There are many joys in our load of toys, as many a child will know. We'll scatter them wide on our wild night ride o'er the crisp and sparkling snow. Now it was on the same Christmas Eve that little Margot and her brother Dick and her cousins, Ned and Sarah, were visiting Margot at her house. They came in from making a snowman with their clothes damp, their mittens dripping, and their shoes and stockings wet through and through. They were not scolded, for Margot's mother knew the snow was melting. But they were sent early to bed that their clothes might be hung over chairs to dry. The shoes were placed on the red tiles of the hearth, where the heat from the hot embers would strike them. And the stockings were carefully hung in a row by the chimney, directly over the fireplace. That was the reason Santa Claus noticed them when he came down the chimney that night. And all the household was fast asleep. He was in a tremendous hurry, and seeing the stockings all belonged to children, he quickly stuffed his toys into them and dashed up the chimney again. Appearing on the roof so suddenly that the reindeer were astonished at his agility. I wish they would all hang up their stockings, he thought, as he drove to the next chimney. It would save me a lot of time, and I could then visit more children before daybreak. When Margot and Dick and Ned and Sarah jumped out of bed next morning and ran downstairs to get their stockings from the fireplace, they were filled with delight to find the toys from Santa Claus inside them. I think they found more presents in their stockings than any other children of that city had received, for Santa was in a hurry and did not stop to count the toys. Of course, they told all their little friends about it, and of course, every one of them decided to hang his own stockings by the fireplace the next Christmas Eve. Even Bessie Blithesome, who made a visit to that city with her father, the great Lord of Lord, heard the story from the children and hung their own pretty stockings by the chimney when she returned home at Christmas time. On his next trip, Santa Claus found so many stockings hung up in anticipation of his visit that he could fill them in a jiffy, and then away again in half the time required to hunt the children up, he would place the toys by their bedside. The custom grew year after year and has always been a great help to Santa Claus. And with so many children to visit, he surely needs all the help we are able to give him. Claus had always kept his promise to the Knooks by returning to the Laughing Valley by daybreak, but only the swiftness of his reindeer has enabled him to do this, for he travels over all the world. He loved his work, and he loved the brisk night ride on his sleigh and the tinkle of the sleigh bells. On that first trip with the 10 reindeer, only Glossie and Flossie wore bells. But each year thereafter, for 8 years, Claus carried presents to the children of the Gnome King, and that good-natured monarch gave him in return a string of bells at each visit, so that finally every one of the 10 deer was supplied, and you may imagine what a merry tune the bells played as the sleigh sped over the snow. The children's stockings were so long that it required a great many toys to fill them. Soon Claus found there were other things besides toys that children love. So he sent some of the fairies, who were always his good friends, into the tropics, from whence they returned with great bags full of oranges and bananas, which they had plucked from the trees. And other fairies flew to the wonderful valley of Funnyland, where delicious candies and bonbons grow thickly on the bushes, and returned laden with many boxes of sweetmeats for the little ones. These things Santa Claus, on each Christmas Eve, placed in the long stockings, together with his toys, and the children were glad to get them, you may be sure. Once, just as the reindeer were ready to start on their yearly trip, a fairy came to Claus and told him of 3 little children who lived beneath a rude tent of skins on a broad plain where there were no trees whatever. These poor babies were miserable and unhappy, for their parents were ignorant people who neglected them, sadly. Claus resolved to visit these children before he returned home, and during his ride, he picked up the bushy top of a pine tree, which the wind had broken off, and placed it in his sleigh. It was nearly morning when the deer stopped before the lonely tent of skins, where the poor children lay asleep. Claus at once planted the bit of pine tree in the sand and stuck many candles on the branches. He hung some of his prettiest toys on the tree, as well as several bags of candles. It did not take long to do all of this, for Santa Claus works quickly. And when all was ready, he lit the candles, and thrusting his head at the opening of the tent, he shouted, "Merry Christmas, little ones!" And with that, he leaped into his sleigh and was out of sight before the children, rubbing the sleep from their eyes, would come out to see who had called them. You can imagine the wonder and joy of those little ones who had never in their lives known a real pleasure before. When they saw the tree, sparkling with lights that shone brilliant in the gray dawn, and hung with toys enough to make them happy for years to come, they joined hands and danced around the tree, shouting and laughing until they were obliged to pause for breath. And their parents also came out to look and wonder, and thereafter had more respect and consideration for their children, since Santa Claus had honored them with such beautiful gifts. The idea of the Christmas tree pleased Claus, and so the following year he carried many of them in his sleigh and put them up in the homes of poor people who seldom saw trees, and placed candles and toys on the branches. Of course, he could not carry enough trees in one load of all who wanted them, but in some homes, the fathers were able to get trees and have them all ready for Santa Claus when he arrived. And these the good Claus always decorated as prettily as possible. He hung with toys enough for all the children who came to see the tree lit. These novel ideas and the generous manner in which they were carried out made the children long for that one night in the year when their friend Santa Claus should visit them. And as much anticipation as very pleasant and comforting, the little ones gleaned much happiness by wondering what would happen when Santa Claus next arrived. For many years he carried on this noble work, for the simple, hard-working life he had led gave him perfect health and strength. And doubtless a man can live longer in the beautiful Laughing Valley, where there are no cares and everything is peaceful and merry, than in any other part of the world. But when many years had rolled away, Santa Claus grew old. The long beard of golden brown that once covered his cheeks and chin gradually became gray and finally turned to pure white. His hair was white too, and there were wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, which showed plainly when he laughed. But in spite of these things, he remained as lively as ever, and was jolly, with his kind eyes sparkling brightly as they did the first day when he came to the Laughing Valley. Yet a time is sure to come when every mortal who has grown old and lived his life is required to leave this world for another. So it's no wonder that after Santa Claus had driven his reindeer on many a Christmas Eve, those staunch friends finally whispered among themselves that they had probably drawn his sleigh for the last time. But King Och decided to bestow upon Klaus the mantle of immortality, calling him the patron saint of children. And the mantle, it became a part of his being, and neither mortal nor immortal could ever take it from him. And the red blood of everlasting life coursed swiftly through his veins. The next morning, when Santa Claus opened his eyes and gazed around the familiar room, which he had feared he might never see again, he was astonished to find his old strength renewed and to feel the red blood of perfect health coursing through his veins. He sprang from his bed and stood where the bright sunshine came in through his window and flooded it with its merry dancing rays. He did not then understand what had happened to restore him the vigor of youth. But in spite of the fact that his beard remained the color of snow and his wrinkles still lingered in the corners of his bright eyes, old Santa Claus felt as brisk and merry as a boy of 16. And he was soon whistling contentedly as he busied himself fashioning new toys. Then Och came to him and told of the mantle of immortality and how Klaus had won it through his love for little children. It made old Santa look grave for a moment to think that he had been so favored, but it also made him glad to realize that now he would never have to fear being parted from those dear ones. At once he began preparations for making a remarkable assortment of pretty and amusing playthings, and in larger quantities than ever before, for now he might always devote himself to this work. So he decided that no child in the world, poor or rich, should hereafter go without a Christmas gift if he could manage to supply it. The world was new in the days when dear old Santa Claus first began toy making and won by his loving deeds the mantle of immortality. And the task of supplying cheering words, sympathy, and pretty playthings to all the young of his race did not seem a difficult undertaking at all. Every year, more and more children were born into the world, and these, when they grew up, began spreading slowly over the face of the earth, seeking new homes, So Santa Claus found each year that his journeys must extend farther and farther from the Laughing Valley, and that the packs of toys must be made larger. After a few generations, it was remarkable how the number of people continued to grow, and how many more children there were every year to be served. When the people filled all the cities and lands of one country, they wandered into another part of the world. And the men cut down the trees in many of the great forests that had been ruled by Ak. And with the wood they built new cities. And where the forests had been were fields of grain and herds of browsing cattle. You might think the master woodsman would rebel at the loss of his forests, but not so. The wisdom of Ak was mighty and far-seeing. "The world was made for men," said he to Santa Claus, "and I have but guarded the forests until men needed them for their use. I'm glad my strong trees can furnish shelter for men's weak bodies and warm them through the cold winters. But I hope they will not cut down all the trees. For mankind needs the shelter of the woods in summer, as much as the warmth of blazing logs in winter. And however crowded the world may grow, by and by, people made ships from the tree trunks and crossed over oceans and built cities in far lands. The oceans made little difference to the journeys of Santa Claus. His reindeer sped over the waters as swiftly as over land, and his sleigh headed from east to west and followed in the wake of the sun. So as the earth rode slowly, Santa Claus had all of 24 hours to encircle it each Christmas Eve. And the speedy reindeer enjoyed these wonderful journeys more and more. So year after year, and generation after generation, and century after century, the world grew older, and the people became more numerous, and the labors of Santa Claus steadily increased. The fame of his good deeds spread to every household where children dwelt, and all the little ones loved him dearly, and the fathers and mothers honored him for the happiness he had given them when they too were young. And the aged grandsires and granddames remembered him with tender gratitude and blessed his name. And eventually, the fairies decided that Santa should take them on the next journey. They said, "We can come to one of those houses with stoves instead of fireplaces, and we can distribute the toys to the children without the need of using a chimney." Santa, wanting to reach more and more children, decided to lighten his task, and then he asked the parents to assist him. "Get your Christmas trees all ready for my coming," he said to them, "and then I shall be ready to leave the presents without loss of time. And you can put them on the trees when I'm gone." And to others he said, "See that the children's stockings are hung up in readiness for my coming, and then I can fill them as quick as a wink." And often when parents were kind and good-natured, Santa Claus would simply fling down his package of gifts and leave the fathers and mothers to fill the stockings after he had darted away in his sleigh. "I will make all loving parents my deputies," cried the jolly old fellow, "and they shall help me do my work. For in this way I shall save many precious minutes, and few children need be neglected for lack of time to visit them." Besides carrying around the big packs in his swift-flying sleigh, old Santa began to send great heaps of toys to the toy shops, so that if parents wanted larger supplies for their children, they could easily get them. And if any children were, by chance, missed by Santa Claus on his yearly rounds, they could go to the toy shops and get enough to make them happy and contented. And the toy shops also proved convenient whenever a child fell ill and needed a new toy to amuse it. And sometimes on birthdays, the fathers and mothers go to the toy shops and get pretty gifts for their children in honor of the happy event. Perhaps you will now understand how, in spite of the bigness of the world, Santa Claus is able to supply all the children with beautiful gifts. To be sure, the old gentleman is rarely seen in these days, but it is not because he tries to keep out of sight, I assure you. Santa Claus is the same loving friend of children that in the old days used to play and romp with them by the hour. And I know he would love to do the same now, if he had the time. But you see, he is so busy all the year making toys, and so hurried on that one night, when he visits our homes with his packs, he comes and goes among us like a flash, and it's almost impossible to catch a glimpse of him. And although there are millions and millions more children in the world than there used to be, Santa Claus has never been known to complain of their increasing numbers. The more the merrier, he cries with his jolly laugh. And the only difference to him is the fact that his little fairies have to make their busy fingers fly faster every year to satisfy the demands of so many little ones. In all this world, there is nothing so beautiful as a happy child, says good old Santa Claus. And if he had his way, the children would all be happy. And that's the end of our story. To the beautiful faith of childhood, the perpetuation of a charming fable, and to a world made better by the Christmas spirit, this little volume is dedicated. So I invite you to take off your shoes, close your eyes, becoming comfortable in the ways that you know best, settling into your bed, feeling your body supported, aware of the softness of your sheets and blankets and pillow. Breathe in deeply and begin to let go of the thoughts and memories of the day. This is your time to simply settle into this story as we go on a journey to inspire you this Christmas. So let's begin. Far off in the land of Alaska, where the winter days are dark and the summer, the sun shines all day, there lived a little Inuit girl named Tuktu, which means caribou. And as you will see, caribou and reindeer were the focus of the life of this little girl. She also had a brother who was 2 years older. His name was Ukluk, which meant great brown bear. Tuktu's mother was Anana, Her name meant soft, mild, gentle, loved by many, and that is exactly who she was. Anana loved her family and worked very hard making their food and creating all of their clothing, from jackets to boots to mittens and hats. Their father's name was Katherine, and he was a herder of reindeer. During the winter nights, the herders from the village often gathered in Katharine's house and shared with the children their interesting stories of adventures and unexplainable things. The story that Tuktu and Clarke liked the best was about the chosen deer of the Valley of the Good Spirit. This was especially true of Tuktu. She used to dream of that wonderful valley. She heard that the northern lights, the aurora borealis, came from that valley. Whenever she saw that river of lights moving and dancing across the sky, in their vibrant shades of blue and green and pink and violet, she would feel as if she was in a dream. And then in that dream, she would imagine herself actually getting down into that valley where she could learn all for herself just what the mystery was all about. So you can imagine her delight when her father told her that she and her brother would be going with him to live for a week or two on the border of that valley. Tuktu tingled clear to the tips of her fingers and toes with little thrills of anticipation, excitement, and perhaps just a wee bit of fear. It was the fulfillment of a promise that their father had made to them long ago, that when the deer moved over from their summer feeding grounds to the Valley of the Good Spirit, they should go with him to keep watch from a distance. Even her brother Clarke was excited, though he did his utmost not to appear so, as he trudged along behind his father as if visiting the Great Spirit was an everyday affair. All day they traveled. That is, they traveled what would have been all day where you and I might live. It wasn't all day, though, because way up in Alaska, the sun never goes down during the summer. Eventually, they reached the hut that would become their home for this adventure. Tuktu was so excited just knowing that they were close to the reindeer that were grazing on the hill of the Valley of the Good Spirit. That night, after the evening meal, Tuktu begged her father to once more tell the story of the Valley of the Good Spirit and of the chosen reindeer. "Why is it called the Valley of the Good Spirit?" she asked. "Because," replied Katherine, "a wonderful and good spirit lives and moves there." "Has anyone ever seen him?" Clarke asked. "No," replied Katherine. "None but the deer people, and of these only the chosen ones ever go down into that valley, that we know. But we know that a good spirit lives there. For the deer that graze on the hills above the valley, they don't even need to be watched. They don't even need a herder there, because the good spirits protect them. And every year, 8 deer are chosen. They disappear for a while, and then the next year, they are returned to us. These deer are the finest sled deer in all of the north. What would happen if one should venture down into the valley? Asked Childlike. That nobody knows, for no one has ever been so bold as even to think of doing such a thing, replied his father. My son, be wise with the wisdom of your elders, and be satisfied. None but the deer folk ever enter that valley, and the only deer are the chosen ones. Although we won't enter the valley, we will stay here, and from a distance watch the herd. If it is such a good spirit, thought Tuktu, although she didn't venture to express her thought out loud, why should anyone fear to go down into the valley? And this is what she continued to wonder about as she fell asleep. The next morning, her father told the children about how the deer gathered and milled. When the deer milled, they had no fear. They would trot tirelessly in a huge circle as the bucks displayed their full strength and beauty. From time to time, as at a signal, one of these trotting deer would leave the circle and stand motionless just outside the curtain of colored mist. Then, when 8 of these deer were chosen, they would disappear in single file, walking off into the shimmering mist of the Kringle Valley to begin their southern migration. The herders knew that when it was time for the winter roundup to take the yearly count, that the 8 best sled deer in all the herds would be missing. They would be the ones that vanished, and herders who discovered that their deer had disappeared actually rejoiced. They counted themselves blessed with good fortune, knowing that their deer were not lost. They knew that when the great herd returned to Kringle Valley, the 8 deer would reappear, fat, sleek, and well cared for. They also knew that these deer thereafter would never mingle with the herd. For as long as they lived, they were now the finest sled deer in all the world. In the summertime, the pace was slower. Tuktu's family called it their lazy, happy days. She loved to roam about, picking flowers and plants that grew in such profusion. Her favorites were wild purple iris, purple fireweed, light blue forget-me-nots, brilliant green ferns, and tall cattails. She also loved being with the reindeer. She had a way with them that the older herders envied. She could go among the deer, free and unnoticed. It was as if she held some strange power over the reindeer, as if they had accepted her as one of their own. She could approach the most timid and nervous among the wilder members of the big herds. As for the sled deer, they might balk and strike at others, but never at Tuktu. When she harnessed them, she loved them, every one, and seemingly they knew it. Her playmates were among the wild ones, yet they were not wild with her. Love has a strange way of making itself felt among the wild folk. And the soft heart of Tuktu was soft because of love. Tuktu was not afraid of the valley. It was enough for her that the valley of the good spirit was sacred and not to be approached by other than the deer people. She would sit for hours looking over toward the valley, wondering what the deer folk experienced there. Now and again, she could see the deer moving on the upper hills. Once, as she was watching them, she said softly, for she had a way of talking to herself, "I wish I were really a Tuktu, a caribou." "Why?" asked Clarke, who had stolen softly up behind her, just in time to hear what she said. "Because then I might be able to go into the valley of the good spirit, and I might even be chosen by the good spirit. Who knows?" One day, an Arctic fog rolled in from the distant sea. It was as if one of those great white fleecy clouds you have seen sailing high in the sky had come to Earth and was being pushed forward to bury everything in its fleecy depths. And in this fog, Tuktu was riding her favorite pack animal, Whitefoot. He had been trained to carry loads on his back. Tuktu had ridden him many times, so it was nothing new for him to feel his little mistress on his back. This time the fog became so thick so that Tuktu had lost her way. The soft mist swirled about them and Tuktu could neither see or hear anything except the clicking of Whitefoot's feet. It was as if she and Whitefoot were alone in a white, wet world of silence. Click, 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 sounded Whitefoot's feet, a click with every step. It was comforting to hear, as each click meant a forward step, and each forward step meant she'd be closer to home. Trot, Whitefoot, trot, remember that Tuktu is on your back, and she wants to go home now. Whitefoot did trot. He trotted steadily, despite the fact that he could see nothing. His head was carried forward and his nose out. His nostrils were extended. With every breath, he was testing the damp air. By the motion, Tuktu could tell when he was going up a hill and when he started down again. She was enjoying the ride, but there came a time when she began to wonder. We should be there by this time, she thought. Yes, indeed, we should be there by this time. Whitefoot has been traveling so fast, he seems to know just where he's going. Oh dear, I wish I could just see a little way. Whitefoot, what is that? Whitefoot had stopped abruptly. Through the mist, at one side, a dim form moved. Tuktu gave a little sigh of thankfulness and was about to drop to the ground, for she was sure that this was the other pack deer that had been left grazing near the camp. But she didn't drop, for she became aware that another dim form was on the other side of her. And then she heard the muffled click, click, click of many feet, a sound that could be heard only when many deer were near. Too often had she listened to it, not to know that she was now in the midst of a herd. She could hear the sound of the click in front of her, behind her, and on both sides. And as she strained her eyes, she could see dim shapes appear and disappear on all sides. "Whitefoot," she whispered, "Whitefoot, where have you taken me?" She wondered if by some chance other herd of reindeer had moved in from the seacoast on its way to the Valley of the Good Spirit. She wondered if it might be that she was in the midst of a band of caribou. She decided this must be it. Probably Whitefoot had smelled or perchance heard them, so had joined them. She was not afraid. Did she not know that the reindeer are the most gentle of animals? Had she not lived with them and loved them from babyhood? She would remain on Whitefoot's back and hope that the fog would lift soon. If it did not, she would stop Whitefoot and push the peg into the ground to fasten him. Then they would remain there together until such time as the fog should disappear. There was only one thing that worried Tuktu. If she had to remain there long, what should she eat? But even this did not greatly worry her, for she was sure that the fog would last but a little while, and she knew they could not be far from camp. Whitefoot was no longer trotting, nor were any of the other deer folk. All seemed to be grazing, moving along slowly as they grazed. Tuktu became drowsy. Once or twice, she nodded, and the wonder was that she didn't slip from Whitefoot's back. And all about her, there was the gentle click, click, click of moving feet, and now and then the soft intake of breath and gentle sniff of grazing deer. Unafraid, Tuktu rode in the midst of the great herd. How long it was before she had a chance to slip from Whitefoot's back, she had no idea. But presently, from sundry sounds, dull but unmistakable, which reached her through the fog, she knew that the deer were bedding down. They were lying down to chew the cud, as often cattle do. Whitefoot stopped. Tuktu slipped from his back. A moment later, Whitefoot lay down. Tuktu snuggled up against his back. Despite the dampness of the fog, she was conscious of a pleasant warmth. In a few minutes, she was asleep. And then, Tuktu was awakened by the sound of a bell. She knew it was a bell because she had once heard a bell on a ship which had come in close to the shore when they were camped there. But this bell was sweeter, far than had been the bell on the ship, though that had seemed the most wonderful sound that she had ever heard. Slowly, she opened her eyes. Abruptly, she sat upright and rubbed both eyes with her knuckles. Her first thought was that she was still in the fog. But when she looked up, she saw there was neither fog nor cloud. It was only when she looked below that she saw a fog, and this fog was not like any fog she had ever known. It was a mist of many colors that shimmered and blended and parted and flashed as like the northern lights in the winter. And somewhere, hidden by that wondrous colored mist, was that silver bell. She was on the slope of a great hill. All about her, contentedly chewing their cuds, were the deer people. As far as she could see in either direction and across the sides of the opposite hill, the deer lay. She knew that not only was Kotuk's herd there, but also many other herds. Never had she seen such rich pasture. Never had she seen such flowers. And there were great masses of reindeer moss, lichens showing the season's growth. No wonder the deer people sought the hillsides of this wondrous valley. She caught her breath. It had come to her where she was. She knew that she was with the herd on one of the slopes of the Valley of the Good Spirit. It was just as she had heard it described around the winter fire pots, only far more beautiful. Tuktu rubbed her eyes. Perhaps this was only a dream. She put out her hand. There was Whitefoot contentedly chewing his cud. And Whitefoot was no dream. He was real. For even as she touched him, he bent his head and gently scratched one of his antlers with the point of a hind hoof. Again she heard the soft, clear, silvery notes of that hidden bell. Then clearly, though faintly, she heard many other sounds. There was the blowing of trumpets, the beating of drums, fairy music coming from the heart of that wonderful mist below her. And the mist itself, never had she seen anything so beautiful. All the colors of the rainbow, all the wondrous colors of the sunset, all the shooting, flashing fires of the aurora borealis seemed mingled there. Tuktu knew that she ought to be afraid. Had not her father said that only from a distance had any man looked into that wondrous valley? Had she not seen fear in his eyes at the mere mention of the Valley of the Good Spirit? He who was not afraid to meet Nanook the polar bear single-handed. Had she not heard the herders speak in whispers when they told of the Valley of the Good Spirit? Of a certainty, she should be afraid, but somehow she wasn't. She knew she ought to be, for she knew that she was where not even the boldest man in all the great Northland would dare to put his foot. Yet she was not afraid. It must be that the Good Spirit means no harm to little children, thought Tuktu. It must be that the Good Spirit, who loves the deer folk, loves also little children, or he would not have allowed Whitefoot to bring me here. I wonder what is going on below that wonderful mist. I wonder. Oh, how I wonder. But if it were meant that I should know, or that anyone should know, the mist would not be there. I guess it's all right to wonder, but it would be all wrong to try to find out. The deer people are satisfied to stay on these hills, so I will be satisfied. But there must be something very wonderful and very beautiful down there. I wish Aklak were here. He will not believe me when I tell him that I have looked into the Valley of the Good Spirit. My father will not believe me when I tell him that I have looked into the Valley of the Good Spirit. No one will believe me. Only the deer folk will know. I, Tuktu, am looking down in the Valley of the Good Spirit, and no harm has come to me. I think it must be because the spirit of love is here. The deer are rising. I wonder what that means. I must hold fast to Whitefoot, for he must take me home. Whitefoot had already scrambled to his feet. Once more Tuktu climbed on his back. Then Whitefoot began to move toward the upper end of the valley. and Tuktu saw that all of the deer on both sides were moving in the same direction. They stopped and stood motionless. A moment later, they started trotting again. Tuktu had been on the far side at the upper end of the plain, farthest from the curtain of beautiful mist. Now, when she came around, she saw that standing just outside the edge of that many-colored curtain was a magnificent reindeer. He stood motionless, his head held proudly, displaying his wide-spreading antlers with many points. Once more the herd began to mill. Presently, it stopped as abruptly as before. This time, when Whitefoot brought Tuktu around where she could see, there were 2 deer standing motionless, one behind the other, at the edge of the beautiful mist. So it went on until 7 deer were standing there. Tuktu knew what it meant. She knew that she was looking at the chosen deer of the good spirit. She knew that one more was to be chosen. So far, she had not seen the choosing. Each time, she had been on the far side of the herd when it had so abruptly stopped. Perhaps you can guess how her heart was beating with excitement as once more the outer ring of deer took up that fast, clicking trot. Would the 8th and last deer be chosen while she was on the far side and could not see? Round and round the deer trotted. Once more, Tuktu was coming in sight of the 7 chosen deer. It seemed to Tuktu as if from that colored mist there shot out a flash of light. The deer stopped. Motionless they stood, as if frozen in their tracks. Tuktu held her breath. She saw that the head of every deer was turned toward that shining curtain of colored mist. A ray of light shot out from it. It touched a splendid deer 2 places ahead of Whitefoot. At its touch, he stepped out from the circle and slowly took his place with the 7 standing deer. It was Speedfoot, the finest deer in Kodak's herd. The sound of a silver whistle was heard, and the 8 deer began to move forward. Slowly, proudly they walked. The leader disappeared in the wonderful mist. The second followed, and so on, until the last one had vanished. Then once more the outer deer of the great herd began to mill. Tuktu saw that no longer were the does and fawns standing motionless within that milling circle. They were all headed in one direction, and that was toward a low place in the hills leading out of the valley, a pass out to the great wide prairie. The time had come for the herd to leave the valley of the good spirit. Would Whitefoot insist on going with them? Or when they had left the valley, would he take her back to the camp? He was once more bringing her around to the point nearest the cloud of mist, wherein the 8 chosen deer had disappeared. Tuktu looked eagerly to see if by any chance she might get one more glimpse of them. And even as she looked, that ray of light shot out once more, and this time it touched Whitefoot. Whitefoot stepped out from the herd and stood motionless. Motionless, facing the curtain of glorious mist, Whitefoot stood, On his back, as motionless, sat Tuktu. Once more the clicking of many feet had begun. The great herd was moving. Tuktu did not turn to look. She was not exactly frightened, but she was filled with a great awe. She felt as if she could not take her eyes from that curtain of mist, even if she would. The clicking behind her grew fainter, then it ceased altogether, and still Whitefoot stood motionless. Directly in front of Tuktu, the mist began to glow, first faintly pink, then a beautiful rose, and finally a rich, warm red. Tuktu drew a long breath and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there stood before her one such as she had never seen before. He was all dressed in red. His hair was white and he wore a long white beard. Never had Tuktu seen such a beard before. His eyes twinkled like the twinkling of the stars on a frosty night. Around them were many fine wrinkles. They were laugh wrinkles. He was laughing now. He laughed and he laughed. "Hello, little girl," he cried. "Hello. What are you doing alone up here? Have you come in search of your straying deer?" Poor Tuktu, she couldn't find her tongue. She knew who this must be. She knew that this must be the good spirit whom no one had ever seen. She felt she ought to slip from Whitefoot's back and bow herself at the good spirit's feet. But she couldn't move. No, sir, she couldn't move. When at last Tuktu could find her tongue, all she could do was to whisper, "Are you the good spirit?" Those eyes looking at her in such a kindly way twinkled more than ever, and all the little laugh wrinkles around them grew deeper. He began to shake all over. He shook, and he laughed so merrily that presently Tuktu herself began to laugh. She couldn't help it. It was catching. Yes, sir, it was catching. "Ho, ho, ho," said he, "my dear Tuktu. It may be that I am that to you. I hope I am. It seems to me that nothing much nicer be, but elsewhere all the great world round, wherever there are children found, I'm known as Santa Claus, my dear. Or else, perchance, of me you hear as old Saint Nick, who once a year with pack and sleigh and wondrous dear to little folk who have been good and done those things that children should, brings Christmas Day the books and toys that always gladden girls and boys. But when the Christmas season ends, I hasten here to where my friends, the fairies, elves, and busy gnomes, for countless years have made their homes. You are, my dear, the first who ever ventured here." It was such a jolly voice, and those eyes twinkled so, and he shook all over so when he laughed, that Tuktu no longer had the slightest fear. "If you please, good Santa," said she, "I have never heard of Christmas. What is Christmas?" Santa's face sobered. All the lines softened from his face, and it became very beautiful. Simply so that Tuktu could fully understand, he explained that Christmas is the season of loving thought. It is the season when self is forgotten, and the desire of each is to make others happy. He told her that Christmas was about the birth of the Christ child who brought love to the world. He told her that he now carries Christmas joy to the boys and girls of all the great world. He told her how all the year through the fairies and elves and trolls and gnomes were busy down in this valley, hidden by the wondrous many-colored mist, making the things which he was to take on his yearly journey to make glad the hearts of little children. He told her how the spirit of love was abroad throughout the great world in the Christmas season, and how those who do for and give to others are the ones in whom the Christmas spirit lives all the year through, and who thus find the greatest happiness. "It's not in receiving, my dear," said he, "but in giving, in love, you will find to be that fullness of joy and that sweet content. For this is what the beautiful Christmas season is meant." "And does no one give to you, kind Santa?" Tuktu asked a little breathlessly. You should have heard Santa Claus laugh then. Indeed, you should have heard him laugh. You should have seen his eyes twinkle. "Every year I receive the greatest gift in all the great world," said he. "And what is that?" whispered Tuktu. "The love of little children," replied Santa Claus. "Not in all the great world is there any gift to compare with the love of little children, and it is mine every Christmas." Tuktu still sat on the back of Whitefoot. As Santa Claus talked, he came over to Whitefoot and gently stroked his face. Whitefoot stood without motion. It was the more surprising because Whitefoot had always been rather unruly. He never had been one to willingly acknowledge a master. Only Tuktu had been able to handle him without trouble. Santa looked up straight into the eyes of Tuktu. "Tell me, my dear," said he, "how you came to venture into this valley. Did you not know that only the deer folk come here?" "Yes, I knew," replied Tuktu in a low voice. "I knew, good Santa, and I would not have thought of coming myself. It was Whitefoot who brought me here. He brought me here, and I didn't know where he was bringing me." Then she told how she had been lost in the fog, and how when she had awakened from her nap in the midst of the great herd, she had discovered where she was. She told how she would have left even then, but could not, and her lips trembled a little as she talked, for she was fearful that the good spirit might think that she had done wrong. "And why do you think that the deer folk come here every year?" inquired Santa Claus. "That the blessed 8 may be chosen," said Tuktu. "And what, my dear, do you mean by the blessed 8? Santa Claus inquired. Then Tuktu told him of the tale she had heard around the winter fire pots, and how it had been long known that every year 8 deer were chosen from the great herd in the Valley of the Good Spirit, and how the following year these deer always returned to their owners, and were the finest sled deer in all the north, so that the owner of one of these was considered blessed above his fellows. Santa Claus sighed. "They ought to be good sled deer," said he. "I spend enough time in training them." "For what purpose, my dear, do you think these deer are chosen each year?" Tuktu shook her head. "That," said she, "no one knows. all that is known is that each year the 8 deer are chosen, and the following year they are returned to bless their owners. That is enough. The good spirit has some wise purpose, or the deer would not be taken and returned. Do you know, said Santa, that the reindeer are among the oldest of all the peoples of the earth? It is so. It has been said that man and woman were created to look after the reindeer, and the reindeer were created to look after them. Almost since man and woman began, the reindeer have furnished them with food and clothing, and carried them or drawn them wherever they wish to go. Have you driven deer to the sled? Have you ever sat behind a running reindeer and felt the rush of the cutting wind, and felt now and then the sting of the snow thrown from his flying feet? Tuk-Tu's eyes shone, and she clapped her hands softly. Don't you love it? She cried. Santa Claus nodded, and he chuckled. That is why the 8 deer are chosen each year. When I made my first Christmas journey, it was a reindeer who drew my sled. My pack was small, and my journey was short, and a single deer was all I needed. But as the Christmas spirit swept farther and farther throughout the great world, and more children looked for my coming, my pack became larger, and I had to travel much faster. So then I used 2 deer, and then 3, 4, 5, until now 8 are needed. 8 of the finest deer to be found in all the herds. They must have speed and strength, for they must take me fast and carry me far. They must have beauty with antlers of many points. They must be stout of heart and full of courage. They must be gentle. So it is that each year I must get a new team. And so each year the reindeer, the finest in all the great Northland, feed for a while in Kringle Valley. Then when the time comes, as it came today, they pass before me at their best, that I may choose those for my next Christmas journey into the great world. Those you saw vanish in the colored mist are the 8 who will take me next Christmas to carry joy to little folk. In all that great herd you saw, there is none other the equal of those chosen, and all the deer folk know it. Just once will they make that wonderful journey, for only for that one time will they be at their very best. At the next Christmas, there will be 8 others to take their places. But always the 8 bear the same names. Would you like to hear them, Tuk-Tu? Shyly, Tuk-Tu nodded. If you please, she said. My, how the eyes of old Santa Claus twinkled. They are Donder and Blitzen, Dancer and Prancer, Dasher and Vixen, Comet and Cupid, said he. I couldn't drive deer by any other names. They are magic names, and those deer will become magic deer when they start on their Christmas journey. Now, my dear, Whitefoot will take you straight back to the place from which he brought you. You have seen that which you may never see again, the choosing of the deer. But always you will remember that in the valley of the good spirit, love dwells, and that love may be carried throughout the world. Donder and Blitzen, Dasher and Vixen, Dancer and Prancer, Comet and Cupid, repeated Tuk-Tu to herself, and her eyes were like stars, Do the children out in the great world love them? You should have seen Santa's eyes twinkle then, and you should have seen all the laugh wrinkles around his eyes. I suspect they do, said he, and they must love the ones who bring me to them each year. But they have never seen my reindeer, so I really don't know. And then you should have seen Tuk-Tuk's eyes open. Do you mean, she asked, that they never ever have seen your deer? Santa Claus nodded. That's what I mean, said he. You see, the night before Christmas, when I make that magic trip, I must go so far, and I must go so fast that there is no time, not even 1 wee minute, to waste. And so no one sees me then. Sometimes little boys and girls hide and watch for me and for my deer, but they never see us. And those little boys and girls do not always find all the things they hoped I would bring them. A dreamy look had come into Tuk-Tuk's eyes, a very faraway look. Do they have as fine deer out there in the great world as we have here? She asked. They have no deer at all, little one, said he. That is, they have no reindeer. Most of them would not know a reindeer if they saw one. No reindeer? Cried Tuk-Tuk, and such a look of astonishment as spread over her face. How can they live without the wonderful deer? I'm so sorry for those children. I wish. Tuk-Tuk paused. What do you wish, child? Santa Claus asked in his kindly voice. Tell me what you wish, for you know it is my business to make the wishes of children come true. Tuk-Tuk hesitated. She dropped her eyes shyly. I wish, she said very softly, that I could send them some reindeer. Santa Claus looked at her sharply. He could read her thoughts, and there was not one single little thought of self there. She was thinking of the children who had never seen the reindeer, and how wonderful it would be if only they could see the blessed 8. When she looked up and saw Santa's kindly eyes studying her, she spoke impulsively. Kind Santa Claus, said she, speaking hurriedly, so hurriedly that the words tripped over each other. Couldn't you go down early some year with your blessed deer so that the children of the great world might see them? I know they would love them just as I do. Santa Claus sighed. I am afraid, said he, there isn't time. You know, it takes time to train deer, and there are no deer in all the great Northland so well trained as those which take me out into the great world every Christmas. You saw the 8 chosen today. It will take me most of my time from now until Christmas to get them properly trained for that magic journey. If the deer were better trained when I got them, I might be able to do it. You know, I don't even have to have reins. They're so perfectly trained. That is why when I am through with them, they are the finest sled deer in all the world. They are no longer magic deer, but they are wonderful sled deer. So you think the children of the great world would like to see the deer? Perhaps they would. I shall have to think it over, my dear. I certainly shall have to think it over. Oh, if you only would, cried Tuk-Tuk, her dark eyes shining with excitement. I wish I could help. I'm so sorry for children who have never seen the beautiful deer. Down somewhere in the midst of the wonderful mist, a silver bell rang. It was so clear, so sweet, that Tuk-Tuk turned her head to listen. When she looked back, Santa Claus had disappeared. The bell rang again, and from out the curtain of mist came Santa's voice once more. "Goodbye, little girl," said he. "The great herd moves, and you must leave the valley. But remember this, my dear. To those who love is love given in return. That is why Christmas is. Remember that, my dear, and always your Christmas will be merry. Better than that, it will be happy." Abruptly, Whitefoot turned and began to move away. With his long, swinging trot, Whitefoot rapidly made his way out of the Valley of the Good Spirit. Once only did Tuktu look back at the cloud of shimmering, many-colored mist. At one point, it glowed a rich, deep red, and as she looked, this turned to rose, and finally to a faint pink, and then vanished. Nowhere was the good spirit to be seen. Out of the valley, over the hill, climbed Whitefoot, and Tuktu turned him in the direction of the camp. There, presently, she fastened him where Clarke had put him to graze. Her father and brother had not returned. As in a dream, she looked back to the hills around the Valley of the Good Spirit. Could it be that she had really been there? Was it not all a dream? But if it were a dream, it had been a wonderful dream, the most beautiful of all dreams. Then she saw off in the distance Kutak and Clarke approaching. When they reached her, they were in high spirits. They had had good hunting, and they brought plenty to eat. Tuktuk cried, "They've moved. The deer have left the Valley of the Good Spirit." Then she told her father and brother of her adventure in the Valley of the Good Spirit. At first, Clarke laughed, as she had known he would. "It was a dream, Tuktu," he cried. "It was a dream. You must have slept through that fog while Father and I were hunting, and the dream spirits took you with them. No one ever has seen the Good Spirit, and no one ever will." But Tuktu stubbornly insisted that it was not a dream, until at last even Clarke began to believe that it might be so. You would have laughed to hear him ply her with questions, all the time pretending that he didn't believe a word of it. Tuktu told him, "The children outside of our beautiful Northland have no reindeer. Most of them have never seen a reindeer." "Well, what drags their sleds then? Dogs?" demanded the practical Clarke. "No," replied Tuktu. "They have other animals called horses, but they cannot be beautiful like our deer, for they have no antlers." "But all those children have heard of our reindeer, Clarke, and there is a certain time in the winter called Christmas, when, in the night, after everyone is asleep, there comes the children's saint and visits each home. And Clarke, he comes with reindeer." Clarke looked up quickly. "The Good Spirit?" he cried. Tuktu's eyes were shining as she nodded. "It must be," she said, "for who else would have reindeer? And listen, Clarke, he is short and round and shakes when he laughs, and he has a white beard and a fur-trimmed coat and a fur-trimmed hat. And his reindeer take him right up on the roofs of the houses. And then he takes a pack on his back and goes right down the chimney. And he leaves gifts for little children while they're asleep. When he has made his visit, he goes right up the chimney again and jumps in his sleigh and calls to his reindeer, and away he goes to the next stopping place. And he makes all those visits in one night. No wonder he wants reindeer. No wonder he wants the very best reindeer. But if no one ever sees him, how do they know what he looks like? Demanded practical Clarke. Oh, replied Twas, it is only on the night before Christmas that he never is seen. I mean, he's never seen coming down the chimney and putting the gifts for the children where they'll find them. But he is seen off and going about before Christmas. For he has to find out where the children live, so they can receive the presents. And the children give him letters and tell him what they want. So he leaves the Northland early, sometime before Christmas, and goes out into the great world. Then he returns for the gifts, and the night before Christmas makes that wonderful flying trip with the deer. He loves reindeer. Of course he loves the reindeer, Clarke interrupted. How could he help loving the reindeer? Aren't they the most important animals in all the great world? The reindeer work for us. They carry us where we want to go. We do not have to carry food for them, for they find it for themselves. They furnish us with food and clothing and our tents. Twas agreed with Clarke and then continued. Clarke, the good spirit told me that all over that land at Christmas time they have beautiful green trees covered with lights at night and many shining things. And sometimes these trees are hung with presents for the boys and girls. And sometimes the good saint appears at one of these trees and with his own hands gives the gifts to the children. But the very day after Christmas, he disappears, and he is seen no more until the Christmas season comes again. And no one knows where he is. All the children wonder and wonder where he is all through the year, but they've never been able to find out. But do we know, Clarke, that the children's saint is the good spirit who lives in the valley of the good spirit? Oh, Clarke, wouldn't it be too wonderful if he would choose our dear for that marvelous Christmas journey? Much to her surprise, Twas felt him looking at her with a respect in his black eyes, which was new in her experience. And she noticed, too, that he no longer teased her. Never had he been so gentle and thoughtful. Yet never once could she get him to say that he believed the story of the Valley of the Good Spirit. Now there was one thing that Twas did not tell Clarke. It was that the last deer chosen was from their father's own herd. Never had Clement had a deer chosen by the Good Spirit from his herd. Until now. Twas had known that it was her father's deer because she had been near enough to see the earmark. Besides, there was no other deer in the herd to compare with it. Sometimes when Clarke insisted that it was all a dream, she would be almost persuaded that he was right, but then she would remember that it was her father's finest deer, Speedfoot, which had been chosen. If, she would say to herself, we cannot find Speedfoot in the roundup, I shall know for certainty that I did not dream. It will be the proof. Thereafter, she spent many hours wandering in and out through the great herd, looking for this particular deer and rejoicing that she could not find it. And while Twas dreamed her daydreams as she worked, little Spot, the finest young deer in all the herd, was dreaming daydreams. And the strange thing was that his dreams were very like the dreams of Twas. He dreamed of being a magic deer. He dreamed of being one of that team of magic deer with which the good spirit made his wonderful journey out into the great world each Christmas. For he had discovered that it was the strongest and swiftest deer that were chosen to draw the sleds of the herders. But there was one big difference in the dreaming of these two young dreamers. Tuktu had no thought of herself, whereas little Spot was thinking chiefly of his own glory. He had no thought of others, but only great ambition for himself. There are many people like little Spot in the great world. All that winter, Clarke worked with his 8 deer. Every day he drove one or another of them. Spring came, and before the snow was gone, the fawns were born. It was a cold, cold world that those baby deer came into, but they did not seem to mind it. Those were busy days for Tuktu and Clarke, but they spent much time looking after the mother deer and to see that their babies were properly taken care of. Now and then they would find a fawn that had lost its mother, and then would begin a search for the mother. Little by little the snow disappeared, and the big herd began to move toward the sea. It was heading toward the summer range. And at last, all the fawns were earmarked. Each owner counted his deer and knew just how much his herd had increased. And soon as there was a chance, Tuktu whispered in Clarke's ear, "I told you that Speedfoot was not in the herd. Wait now until the herd moves up to the Valley of the Good Spirit, and you'll find him there." Of course, Katherine had been watching for that particular deer. It had been the pride of his heart the year before, and its disappearance had worried him. He had thought that somehow it might have been overlooked on the winter grazing grounds. But when the roundup was over, he knew that the animal was not in the herd. And he was torn between fear and hope. His hope was they would find Speedfoot bearing the earmarks of the Good Spirit. To Katherine and to Clarke, it was merely a hope. But to Tuktu, it was a certainty. She hadn't the least shadow of a doubt, and her heart sang for joy. It was late when Katherine and his family reached the camp near the Valley of the Good Spirit. The snow had been just right, and the reindeer had traveled steadily and fast, for they were in splendid condition. Now they were fastened out, each tied by a long line to a hummock under the snow. There was plenty of food here, and the deer at once began to paw down to get it. Katherine and Nana had no thought for anything but rest after the evening meal. But not so their 2 children. They could not forget that they were in sight of the hills around the Valley of the Good Spirit, and that it might be over there in that valley were the 8 missing deer. So when their father and mother were asleep, they slipped out from the hut for a look over toward the wonderful valley. For was it not from that valley that the marvelous northern lights flashed up through the sky? There was no wind. The cold was intense. But Tuktu and Clarke were dressed for it, and they minded it not at all. It seemed as if the stars were so close that they could be reached. It was not moonlight, for this was the period when the moon was not visible, but the starlight almost made up for it. And then, as they stood there looking over toward the Valley of the Good Spirit, a long streamer of light suddenly flashed out. And up, 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 until it was quite overhead, it quivered, almost died down, and then shot up again. Then came another and another and another. The northern lights, the merry dancers of the sky, dimmed the stars and made the night almost as light as day. At first, these northern lights were simply white, and then they were shot with yellow and red. Even though they had seen these fires of the sky many times, this time it was different. They caught their breath and held to each other with a little bit of fear. Those fires were no longer mere flashing white, shimmering, dancing streamers of light. Now they were yellow and red in many shades, and they appeared as if in very truth they were fires leaping high into the sky. And as they had so often heard it said, those dancing, leaping lights were coming out of the valley of the good spirit. Certainly they were flashing from directly behind the hills that shut away that valley. So of course they must be coming from the valley. Then the lights died down, and for a few moments there was no light save from the stars. Then from directly over the valley of the good spirit, a long streamer of white flickering light crept up, and as it crept, it broadened until it was like a broad path across the sky toward the south. There was the tinkle of silver bells. Tuktu touched Clarke. "See, Clarke, see the deer," she whispered. But Clarke had already seen them. On that broad, shining path, a pair of reindeer had appeared. He knew them instantly. They were two of the deer he had trained and which had disappeared. Out of the shimmering light behind them moved two more. And then he recognized there could be no doubt. He would have known them among 10,000 deer. They were harnessed 2 and 2, and as they moved forward, another pair appeared, and then another. Clinging together, breathless, round-eyed, Clarke and Tuktu stared. 8 deer they counted, 8 deer harnessed 2 and 2. Would there be more? The curtain of light low above the hilltop seemed to burst in a glory of color, such as made what they had seen before seem as nothing. And out of the midst of that glory, drawn by the 8 deer, came a sled. On it, Tuktu recognized instantly Santa Claus, the good spirit, whom she had seen in the valley. He was short and jolly and round and fat, with a fur-trimmed coat and a fur-trimmed hat, and he laughed. "Hello, little folk," he cried, "hello. The boys and girls of the world this year will see for themselves my splendid deer, will see and love them and surely know that the reindeer come, though there be no snow. For their magic deer for my magic sleigh, and we circle the world in a single day. There is naught so faithful and naught so quick to carry the message of old Saint Nick. By training my steeds you have saved for me some weeks of labor, and so you see, it happens I'm able to start this year in time for the children to see the deer. and all who see them, I tell you true, a Christmas greeting will send to you. As you will have given joy to all the little folk of the great world this year, in like degree will your own Christmas be merry, and will happiness fill your hearts. And now, my dears, I must away. Santa waved a mittened hand to them, then turned to his deer and cried, "Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer, now Vixen, on Donder and Blitzen." Down a shining path of light, across the sky toward the south, the 8 deer dashed, until in a breath they were mere specks. Up from the valley, the orange and red lights streamed higher and higher, until all the sky was a blaze of beautiful light. When the lights died down, only the stars were to be seen, twinkling so close that it seemed as if they might be picked from the sky. And thus it was that Tuktu and Akhlak found happiness and great content because of their trust in the power of the Good Spirit and their special connection to the magnificent reindeer that helped to bring Christmas love and joy and wonder, not only to their lives, but to all the children of the world. And that's the end of our story. And I wish you sweet dreams and good night and happy holidays.